In this lecture, we will examine the factors that led to Ohio's emergence as a major American industrial center after the Civil War. Ohio's location, its natural resources, and its financial climate led to some highly impressive economic growth in the decades following the Civil War. Pictured on this slide is a stock certificate from the Columbus and Xenia Railroad Company. This company was one of dozens that emerged to meet the heavy demand for transportation in Ohio. Most east-west rail routes in the United States crossed Ohio, and the Ohio River also served as an important transportation artery. The city of Cincinnati was especially well placed in its location at the midpoint on the Ohio River. The high transportation costs at the time also meant that Ohio cities had cost advantages over eastern competitors. Cleveland, for example, was located near oil and coal regions and was centrally located to Great Lakes shipping. Limestone and coal, which were both very valuable industrial commodities, shipped through Ohio ports on Lake Erie and on the Ohio River. This map depicts U.S. railroads in operation by 1870. As you can see, many of them crisscross Ohio. At this time, Ohio had more miles of rail track than any other state in the Union. The image on this slide is from 1899, and it depicts the Standard Oil Refinery No. 1 in Cleveland, Ohio. Oil was also plentiful in the Lima, Findlay areas, as well as parts of eastern Ohio. Toledo was a major refining and shipping port, while there was also a sustained natural gas boom in Findlay. Salt was primarily located in the northeastern quadrant of the state, and in the late 19th century, Ohio was second only to Michigan in salt production. Clay was mined in central and southeast Ohio, and clay was used to produce bricks, china, stoneware, and drainage pipe. Other natural resources from Ohio that were in high demand at the time included gypsum, limestone, sandstone, and shale. The image on this slide depicts a street lit by natural gas in the city of Findlay in the year 1890, and it illustrates why Findlay was known as the City of Light. In 1884, the Findlay Natural Gas Company opened the first commercial natural gas well, and soon the entire city converted to gas light, gas heat, and gas power. And the plumes that you see at the top of these poles are actually natural gas flames, and they just piped the natural gas straight up and lit it. This so-called free energy was marketed to industrialists to encourage them to relocate to Findlay. Unfortunately, this resource was poorly managed, as you can see in this particular image. And by 1900, most gas wells in the Findlay area were exhausted. An oil well named the Klondike well provided a short-lived oil boom in East Toledo from 1893 to about 1910. It's depicted here. Another major pocket was located near Curtis, Ohio, so a little further east of Toledo. The first well in the Toledo area was drilled by a company owned by George Warren Barnes, who was an influential oil entrepreneur in the Midwest. The Western Oilmen's Association was organized by Samuel Golden Rule Jones. We'll talk more about him when we get to politics. He would later become mayor of Toledo. The creation of this organization attests to the growing importance of oil to the Ohio economy. Even today, Ohio has about 1.2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves and something on the order of 50 million barrels of crude oil reserves. The reddish hues on this slide represent natural gas deposits. You can see they're primarily in the eastern portion of the state. The greenish hues represent oil deposits. Ohio ranks currently 18th in the United States in crude oil reserves and 19th in natural gas reserves. Most capital for early economic growth in Ohio came from within the state. As we discussed in earlier lectures, as a result of the Civil War, a great deal of wealth flowed into the state to pay for supplies and war material. War was very good for the Ohio economy. Many cities created what were known as boards of trade. Pictured on this slide is the building that housed that once housed the Toledo Board of Trade. These boards were used to advertise for outside capital and to promote local industries. By the end of the 19th century, though, the need for capital began to exceed even the substantial reserves that were already in the state, and New York and Chicago became major capital destinations for Ohio industries. Ohio led the national movement away from water power and wood-fired boilers to coal power. By 1900, about 90% of Ohio's factories used coal-fired boilers. Coal was the fuel that was also most used for electrical generation in Ohio at the turn of the century. There was an abundance of coal in Ohio, and the state was also close to other states with high-quality coal. Unfortunately for Ohio, much of the coal in the state, and today is the same way, is of a lower quality. Natural gas was something of an exception to the coal rule. In Toledo, Edward Libby moved his glass factory to take advantage of cheap natural gas. Here's an image of the Libby glass factory from about 1900. Ohio was a source of relatively cheap labor, and this factor contributed to Ohio's rise as an industrial powerhouse. Rural residents moved to cities in search of work, while immigrants moving to Ohio, as well as African Americans from the South, added to the plentiful supply of labor. Ohio was also an early center of the American labor movement. The first miners' union was formed in Ohio in 1862, while the powerful American Federation of Labor, or AFL, was formed in Columbus at a convention in 1886. Pictured on this slide is AFL leader Samuel Gompers. This image was taken around the time of the union's founding, perhaps a couple years before then. By the 1880s, Ohio had begun to emerge as one of the most powerful industrial states in the United States. The industrial expositions held in Cincinnati attracted visitors from around the world, and Ohio gained an international reputation as a center of manufacturing. This brings to a close our brief look at the economic, geographic, and demographic factors that helped propel Ohio to the forefront of American manufacturing in the second half of the 19th century.